She wore that coral dress, the one I bought her for our anniversary. It used to mean something. Now it was just luggage filler for her Freedom Weekend. I watched her shove sunscreen, a Bluetooth speaker, and a curling iron into her suitcase like she was preparing for a war that required good lighting and overpriced rose. She hadn't asked if I was okay with the trip. She didn't even bother pretending it was about the girls anymore. I knew. I'd known for months. The name Derek had popped up exactly once. Not in a text, not a call, not even a receipt. A name scribbled in the margin of her planner in a different color ink. On a week, she claimed she'd been at her cousin's in Tennessee. Derek, neatly written in block letters. I didn't confront her then. I just circled it in pencil and waited. If you go, we're done, I said. Calm. Not a threat. A statement. She paused for a half second, just enough to show she'd heard me. Then that little laugh, sharp, mocking, like I was some cartoon husband with empty warnings and faded shirts. You're being dramatic, she said. Then she zipped the bag shut like a closing casket. 6 hours later, at 11:42 p.m., she posted the first photo. Sunset, toes in the sand, stemless wine glass balanced in her hand. The caption read, Freedom Weekend begins. Woman dancing wine glass sun. I stared at it for maybe 5 seconds. Then I got up, walked to the study, pulled the navy blue accordion folder from the cabinet behind the printer, and sat down at my desk. I hadn't touched this thing in over 9 years. Not since the day I finished structuring the repayment guarantee for East Point Realty's third bridge loan. She didn't know that name. She thought I worked in logistics consulting. She never bothered to ask what that meant. The folder was labeled Maple Grove, Covenant File, Alt Clause Number 7. The paper was thick, legal grade, the kind with a slight grit to it when you slide it across wood. Inside were 2 signatures, mine and her boss's. I made one call. Activate the trigger clause, I said. Conduct code. Section 4E. There was silence on the other end. Then a breath. Confirmed, the voice said. Timestamped. Now before I go further, just a small ask. Over 90% of you listening right now haven't subscribed. I get it, truly. But every new subscriber gives my small team the push to keep bringing you stories that nobody else dares to tell. So if you're still here, consider clicking subscribe. You're fueling something bigger than just one voice. Back to the moment. The photo got a few dozen likes by morning. Her sister commented with 3 heart emojis. One of her co-workers, Bethany, I think, replied, Living your best life, Queen. I chuckled at that. Bethany was at that off-site retreat too, which meant the ethics clause I had embedded back in 2014 wasn't just activated, it was now airtight. Multiple guests. No pre-clearance. Company-funded location. And now, publicly documented. Idiots. By 10:07 a.m. the following day, I received a secure email. Clause violation confirmed. Recall proceeding. I didn't go for a walk. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't even smile. I just leaned back in the chair, stared out the window, and thought about the time I took her to that same beach 15 years ago, when we still mattered. She'd worn the coral dress then too. I remembered how it moved in the wind, how she laughed when a pelican stole her bag of chips. I remembered how I'd thought, stupidly, this is my forever. Now she was laughing again. Only this time, it was her who was the pelican, and the chips she'd stolen were mine. By sunset, another photo appeared. This one wasn't even trying to pretend. Her hand was in someone else's. You couldn't see the man's face, but I knew his watch. A black bell and Ross aviation dial. I'd spotted it weeks ago on the kitchen counter. She said it was a friend's she'd found at yoga. That's the moment something clicked. Not rage. Not sadness. Something colder. Mechanical. Like the final lever on a long dormant trap snapping into place. I texted one word to my contact. Proceed. I turned off my phone. And then, I waited. The thing about power is, it's boring. Real power isn't loud. It's a line in a document nobody read past page 12. It's a trust fund named after an orchard that doesn't exist, co-managed by a Cayman shell and a Delaware nonprofit. And it sits there, quietly, waiting. Not for glory. For necessity. I remember the day we drafted the note. I was consulting for a boutique investment group, discrete capital, high-risk urban developments. East Point Realty had needed a quick infusion. 8 figures, unsecured by real estate, but backed by board-level guarantees. Most firms would have laughed. But I knew one of their founding partners. He was arrogant, connected, and one step away from a liquidity crisis he was hiding from his wife. Perfect candidate. So I helped structure the loan, $8.9 million, masked as bridge funding for 3 emerging markets projects. What made it special wasn't the money. It was the clause. Clause 4E. Any conduct by an executive or executive family member that compromises fiduciary responsibility, public trust, or internal confidentiality may trigger an accelerated repayment demand with a 5-business-day compliance window. It was laughed off at the time, boilerplate nonsense, they called it. But I insisted, and they signed, because I buried it inside Amendment 3 to the conditions of disbursement, masked under a non-standard indemnity heading. Their legal team was too rushed, and when the funds cleared, the clause became gospel. Nobody touched it after that. Not the trustees, not the board, not even me, until the wine glass. The caption, the dancing video, that's what woke it up. I sat in my office staring at the document on my second monitor, watching the PDF timestamp update as our compliance agent verified breach. That name again, Derek, now clearly tagged in photos. Not just her, but her sitting poolside with him, another executive's wife, and 2 known board members, all funded by the firm's corporate card, under the guise of a strategy offsite. And now, thanks to her Instagram idiocy, geotagged to the very Villa East Point had written off as a vendor location in the quarterly. It was all I needed. But here's the beautiful part. Not a single person on that trip remembered the clause. Not her. Not her boss. Not the CFO sipping frozen margaritas shirtless in the background of that video. They'd forgotten the note existed. Except I hadn't. Because I wrote it. Not out of spite, back then. Just instinct. I'd spent 30 years watching firms implode because of arrogance. My job was to add stopgaps, pressure valves. That clause wasn't written to punish. It was written to protect money from stupid. But now it was a scalpel, and I was holding it over the artery. I triggered the internal compliance notification first. Quietly, through the trustee firm we used, Graybridge Holdings. Their system's automated. Once breach is logged and verified, a countdown initiates. The company has 5 business days to remit full repayment or enter secured restructuring. Here's the catch. Restructuring requires a 2/3 board vote and unanimous consent from the trustee team, which included me. And the other 2 trustees? One had died. The other was medically incapacitated and under guardianship, which meant I was the only active voice on the lender's side, and the only one who could authorize an extension. Guess how likely that was? The next morning, East Point's system registered the recall. Their CFO would be the first to see it, tucked in with the daily financial alerts. Standard protocol. It would read, per contractual agreement dated October 9th, 2014, ref maple/alt #7. Notice is hereby served of Clause 4E activation and recall of full capital principal. Payment due within 5 business days from issuance. Trustee contact, J.R. Caldwell. That's my name. The same name she hadn't used in 2 months, except when asking if I'd remembered to take the trash out. I didn't feel anything. No glee. No rage. Just that cold click again. Like the final piece of a lock aligning. I leaned back in the chair and said aloud to no one. Now let's see who remembers reading the fine print. And across town, while she floated in a rented pool chair sipping someone else's Prosecco, a bomb had already started ticking. The irony was hard to ignore. A woman who once mocked me for reading the boring parts of everything had just detonated her world by ignoring the one clause that was never meant to be touched. But she didn't read it. None of them did. Because people like her don't see contracts, they see inconvenience. Paperwork is something for the little people. Like husbands. Like assistants. Like me. East Point Realty's ethics policy wasn't vague. It was brutal. They'd had a scandal about a decade ago involving a partner's affair during a company retreat, and the fallout nearly sank their liquidity. So the board overcorrected. Section 6, subparagraph D. Non-employee partners or spouses may not attend off-site strategic gatherings unless approved in writing by Ethics Council and disclosed in pre-retreat audit forms. Violations are considered high-level breaches of fiduciary and reputational trust. She didn't get the approval. She didn't even ask. And even if she had, the moment she clinked glasses poolside with Derek, her boss's boss, and tagged him in the story with a stupid flamingo emoji, it was over. There was a specific photo that sealed it. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a silk cover-up, my Christmas gift, ironically, and sitting between Derek and one of the board members. His hand was resting far too comfortably on her thigh. She wasn't flinching. She was smiling. The caption? When strategy sessions end in sangria. Tropical drink #work hard play harder. She posted that on her public account. Not close friends. Not a burner. Her public Instagram. I didn't even have to dig. It was sent to me by someone I hadn't heard from in years, an old legal intern from the lending firm, who now worked in East Point's HR. Subject line. Thought you might want to see this. He was right. I filed the breach paperwork within 24 hours. It wasn't just a breach. It was a textbook case of Conduct Clause 4E in action. I attached the screenshot. Timestamped. Geotagged. I highlighted the executive names visible. I even included the flight confirmation she left on the kitchen counter. Round trip. Paid on East Point's corporate Amex. Just for flavor, I embedded a copy of the off-site budget, publicly accessible thanks to a minor oversight by their procurement division, and circled the villa rental, meals, and transportation costs. Every dollar had come from investor funds. I wrote one sentence at the end of the filing. This constitutes a direct violation of fiduciary policy and reputational conduct as outlined under 4E and 6D. Recall conditions met. I submitted it to Graybridge Holdings at 8:14 a.m. By 9:37, I received confirmation. Filing logged. Conduct trigger validated. Countdown initiated. And just like that, the entire financial pressure of a recall clause worth nearly $9 million now rested on one very simple fact. My wife wanted to sip sangria with Derek and post about it. I imagined her in that moment, barefoot in the sand, not realizing she had just flicked a match onto an invisible oil slick that had been waiting, dormant, for a decade. The strategic part of me admired it. Not her, God, no. The precision, the elegance. How a single action, seemingly innocent, could unlace an entire corporate scaffolding from one hinge point. One photo, one clause, one man, me, who still remembered what everyone else forgot. But I wasn't done. That afternoon, I logged into my secondary account, the one she didn't know about, and followed her firm's private financial dashboard. I'd helped build it years ago, back when I was consulting and needed access to their capital flow data for stress tests. They never removed my credentials. Cash reserves were low. Their last two projects were over budget and behind schedule. And their emergency liquidity cushion? Tied up in an escrow mess over a South Carolina zoning dispute. Perfect storm. Even if they wanted to repay the recall, they couldn't do it without triggering secondary covenant breaches with their primary lender. Which meant the only option left was restructuring. Which meant a vote. Which meant public disclosure. And every single board member would know, in exquisite detail, who tripped the wire. But she was still on the beach. Still smiling. Still tagging Derek in beach volleyball stories. And the fuse I lit? It wasn't just burning. It was accelerating. The text came in while she was sunbathing with Derek. I know because she posted another story. Him rubbing sunscreen on her shoulders like this was a commercial for betrayal. I didn't need to look, but I did. It was the kind of masochism you develop after 22 years with someone who's convinced you'll never do more than sigh and mow the lawn. Docs verified. Filing. That's all it said. For words. And yet, they had the weight of a sledgehammer wrapped in velvet. From that moment, the clock started ticking. Officially. Irreversibly. Graybridge Holdings triggered the internal protocol at 10:26 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The compliance system, built like a federal filing engine, doesn't stutter. Once the breach is verified and logged, the repayment window slams open. 5 business days. Not 5, we'll see what we can do days. 5 hard days. Then the hammer falls. The recall amount? $8,835,000. And some change. The change was roughly the cost of the beach villa they were all pretending wasn't part of the firm's Q3 expenses. And it wasn't a quiet whisper between lawyers. The compliance notice went out to every necessary party. The trustees, the executive board, the financial oversight committee, and, most importantly, the general counsel at Fairhaven Bank, their primary liquidity partner. The subject line on that one was particularly elegant. Immediate action required. Activation of Clause 4E recall on note ref #maple/alt #7. You'd be amazed how fast reputational fire spreads in a firm like East Point. Before noon, 3 of the board's senior partners had their assistants print the notice in hard copy. Not email. Printed. That's how you know panic is real, when men in $3,000 suits revert to paper. And here's the part they never expected. The recall clause was public. Burying it in trust paperwork didn't make it invisible. Anyone with access to the firm's lending disclosures could see the amendment if they knew where to look. Which meant Fairhaven Bank, who had just issued them a revolving credit line, now saw that their secondary creditor had pulled the ripcord. That was the first domino. Fairhaven's risk management team immediately opened a review of East Point's position. One glance at their latest burn rate, fueled by their 2 over-leveraged luxury developments, and the bank's internal systems flagged them as under review for covenant instability. That's the polite term for we're about to freeze you. Meanwhile, she was sipping something pink out of a hollowed coconut, holding it up like a trophy for her followers. That little smirk on her face made my molars grind. Not because I wanted her back. No, because that look, the one that says I always win, was about to be tested by forces she didn't even know existed. By 3 p.m., East Point CFO had canceled a meeting with city planners and booked a same-day flight back from Miami. Not commercial, private. That's how serious it was. He'd figured out the trigger clause had teeth, but he still didn't know who bit. I watched the financial dashboard like a man watching a dam crack. Cash outflows were spiking. There was no contingency in place. No bridge partner lined up. They'd counted on complacency. That nobody would notice. That no one still alive remembered that clause. Except I wasn't dead. I was sipping my own drink, black coffee, not a coconut, watching the company her lover helped mismanage begin to drown in an ocean of their own arrogance. The compliance chain didn't stop with the recall notice. It also triggered two other effects. A reporting obligation. East Point had to notify all existing investors and senior project partners of any major financial trigger that could affect development timelines. That meant half of their current stakeholders were now aware of the breach and asking hard questions. A pending restructure review. The clause required a board vote if the recall couldn't be satisfied within 72 hours. That vote couldn't proceed without public minutes, which meant someone would eventually have to say, out loud, whose actions caused the recall. And that person's name was going to be Susan. She had no idea, of course. At 5:12 p.m., she posted a group photo. Her, Derek, Bethany, and two older men in business polos. Caption, #winning weekend. So lucky to work with these legends. Briefcase, sun, wine glass. I stared at the photo for a long time, and then I saved it. Because in 3 days, when the board began circling for someone to blame, and reputational blood needed to be spilled, I'd make sure they knew exactly who made that drink taste like kerosene. By sunrise Monday, the ground beneath East Point Realty had already begun to split open, even if no one had yet fallen through. I watched it from my laptop, sipping black coffee while the auto-refresh on my private dashboard blinked new numbers into existence. Expense freeze. Travel lockdown. Internal flags on two executives' corporate cards. The CFO's name appeared 3 times in a single hour under internal queries flagged urgent. It was like watching a forest fire on thermal camera, glowing hotter, spreading faster, while everyone still wandered the woods laughing. At 7:42 a.m., the first resignation landed. Quiet. No statement. Just a board member who suddenly decided to focus on personal health. He'd been looped into the original real estate deal that the recall had funded. He knew exactly how damning that clause was. His name was adjacent to the breach. Better to run before the press release needed quotes. The second came at 11:03 a.m. She was the firm's longest tenured partner, always seen as the adult in the room. She didn't bother with health excuses. Just a single-line email. I will not be attending any further board activities effective immediately. Translation, I'm not going down with this ship, and I'm not defending her. Inside the firm, chaos bloomed like mold. The CFO, Jason, I think, pulled all travel expenses from the last 60 days for review. That triggered a compliance crawl, which lit up like a Christmas tree. Several transactions had been marked vendor meetings, but were clearly entertainment, dinners, spa bookings, even yacht rental services tied to the Miami weekend. The problem wasn't just that the charges existed. It was who approved them. One name kept appearing. Susan. She'd vouched for the trip in an internal chat group. Said she was attending as a consultant spouse. Except there was no consultant on record. Derek wasn't listed on the Miami roster in any official role. So now they had a financial breach, a reputational breach, and a paper trail showing internal deception. Then HR got involved. An internal audit was ordered, focused on unauthorized travel guests, expense policy violations, and ethics breaches tied to off-site conduct. I could picture the memo. Sterile, formal, probably filled with the phrase potential exposure. The executive staff was told to be available but silent. That silence didn't last long, because then came the call. At 2:27 p.m., the CEO of East Point, Susan's direct boss, received a notification that the firm's primary liquidity partner was pulling their revolving line of credit pending financial review. He called the bank in a panic. The general counsel answered. Calm. Cold. Sir, he said, the note has been activated. I don't know what words came after that. Probably something about compliance, reputational risk, mandatory distance. But I do know this. When CEOs hear the note has been activated, it's the corporate equivalent of hearing a knock at the door and knowing it's the IRS with a search warrant. He booked a red-eye. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, my wife, my legally still wife, was dancing barefoot in the sand, her arm looped around Derek's neck, swaying under string lights like she was in some movie about finding herself. She posted a video that evening. The caption? No better way to unwind than dancing with legends. Life's too short for regrets. Clinking glasses, palm tree woman dancing. In the background of the video, you could just barely hear someone shouting something like, "Next round's on me." Probably Derek. Probably on the firm's dime. I watched it twice. Not because I enjoyed it, but because I wanted to memorize the exact moment her face tilted upward, eyes closed, smiling into the breeze like nothing in the world could touch her. I wanted to remember that moment, because the next morning, the breeze would turn, and this time, it would carry smoke. She came through the door humming, barefoot, bronzed, the click of her suitcase wheels breaking the silence like a drunk tambourine. She smelled like ocean and some overpriced lotion she'd bought for the girls, and then hoarded for herself. Her hair was still damp, tossed up in that casual ponytail that always looked accidental but took 20 minutes to perfect. She dropped her sandals by the entryway, next to the shoes I had neatly lined up earlier, and grinned like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. Back, she called into the house, tossing her tote onto the bench. Still alive. I was. Sitting exactly where I'd been for the last hour, in the leather chair near the window, drink in hand, lights dimmed, watching the driveway through the curtains like a scene from a slow-burning noir film. She walked toward me without noticing the tension, without noticing the car still idling behind her in the driveway. The engine hadn't turned off. That was her first mistake. Her second? Assuming she still lived here. Before she could ask why I was dressed like I'd just come from a wake, button down, pressed slacks, the watch she gave me on our 10th anniversary, I heard the second door open. Not ours. The car's. The sound of firm steps across the gravel. She turned, confused. And then he entered. Her boss. The same man she'd danced barefoot beside under twinkling lights. The same man she tagged in photos with captions like #LivingLegends. He looked like he'd been pulled through a hedge at 80 miles an hour. His collar was soaked with sweat, tie half removed. Phone in hand, screen still glowing. "Susan," he said. Just the name. Flat. Monotone. No hello. No welcome home. Just, "Susan." She froze. I watched the muscles in her jaw shift, first into a practiced smile, then twitch uncertainly when it didn't land. "What are you?" He didn't let her finish. He called in the note. Silence. He stepped farther inside, not asking permission. His eyes hadn't left mine since crossing the threshold. "You knew about it?" he asked me, voice like gravel soaked in acid. I didn't blink. I wrote it. He looked like he might throw up or scream, but instead, he turned back to her, holding up the phone like it was a crime scene photo. "Do you understand what you've done?" I don't," she stammered, her voice shrill, cracking at the edges. "What note? What is this?" "Don't," I said from the chair, finally standing, slow and deliberate. "Don't insult him or me by pretending you don't know what this is." Her eyes darted between us, flickering with the growing dread of someone who just realized the party ended 3 hours ago, and she's the last one in the room with the lights back on. "You activated the recall clause," her boss spat, practically shaking. "The one buried in the 2014 bridge loan. The one that requires $9 million we don't have to be paid back in 5 days." "I didn't sign anything," she barked, now defensive, arms crossed like a child caught shoplifting. "No," I said, stepping closer. "You just tagged yourself, Derek, and half the executive board in a series of beachside party photos during a confidential offsite funded with investor money. With drinks. And no pre-clearance. That's all." Her face turned. That's the only word for it. Turned. From glow to ghost. From vacation to funeral. "You're lying," she hissed, grasping for control. "You're twisting things. You're just." "He has the signatures, Susan," her boss snapped. "Yours. Ours. The trustees. There's no out." She turned back to me. "You set this up." "No," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "You did. I just watched." She moved toward me, pleading now, a pathetic mixture of charm and threat. "You can undo it, can't you? I mean, you have pull. You said you just advised. I was a trustee. Now I'm the only one still active. And there's no clause for regret." She looked at her boss like he was going to save her, like maybe he had a boardroom fix or some legal buffer. He didn't. He just stared down at her with a disgust I hadn't seen since the first time I heard Derek's name. "What catastrophe did you just bring on us?" he whispered. And with that, he turned, walked out, and left the door wide open behind him. She stood there, arms limp, skin pale, lips parted, but no sound. For the first time in years, she was completely, irreversibly speechless. And I didn't feel a thing. The sun hadn't even cleared the tree line Monday morning when the conference room at East Point filled with suits, sweat, and the smell of burning time. They'd cleared the calendar, flown in legal from out of state, canceled 2 groundbreakings and a breakfast with the mayor. This wasn't a meeting. It was payoff. I wasn't there, of course. I didn't need to be. My name was in the documents, in the trustee registry, in the recall trigger file. I was now the legal executor of a financial bomb they never thought would go off. And unlike the others, one dead, one deep in dementia care, I was alive, lucid, and utterly disinterested in their pleas. The firm's general counsel, a sharp-tongued woman named Carla who once referred to me as the boring husband, opened the session by reading the recall clause aloud. Her voice cracked halfway through. The repayment must be rendered in full within 5 business days upon verification of conduct clause violation. In the absence of 2/3 trustee override, the active trustee maintains full unilateral discretion. Someone asked what that meant. The CFO answered, "It means we don't negotiate. We obey." The panic spread fast after that. Finance confirmed the worst. Between project float, payroll, and tied-up investment instruments, East Point had less than $2 million in liquid cash. Selling assets would take time they didn't have. Calling in favors would signal weakness. Raising capital publicly would tank their valuations. Options? None. I sat at home with the fireplace on, calmly reviewing the chain of internal emails their assistant GC had helpfully CC'd me on by accident. He must have copied an old group thread and not realized I was still in it. Subject: Emergency. Maple/alt #7 trustee contact info. Confirm access? They didn't even know how to reach me directly. Good. Around midday, she finally texted me. Not a call. A text. Like we were arguing over groceries. "Susan, why are you doing this?" I let it sit. 10 minutes later, another one came. "Susan, is this about Derek? Is this some petty revenge thing? You're better than this." I put the phone face down. I made tea. I answered a few unrelated emails. I took my time. Let her stew. Then I replied, simply, "Me. I didn't do anything. You did." An hour passed before she called. I didn't answer. When she showed up at the house that evening, eyes red, posture defensive but crumbling, I met her at the door. Didn't invite her in. She stared at me like a child trying to work out where the punishment ends. "Please," she said. "You're blowing up an entire company." "For what?" I didn't respond. "You could fix this," she added. "You know how? You wrote the goddamn thing." Still nothing. "You want me to apologize?" she asked, more edge in her voice now. "Fine. I'm sorry. There. Are you satisfied?" "Satisfied?" I repeated, slowly. "Do I look satisfied?" She glanced past me, expecting empathy. Or maybe leverage. There was none. "Why are you being so cold?" she whispered, voice cracking now. "This isn't you." "No," I said. "This is me. This is who I've always been. You just stopped paying attention." Her face contorted. "You're hurting so many people over one mistake." I stepped forward, voice calm. "You're not listening, Susan. I didn't do this to anyone. I simply followed the rules. The rules you broke. The rules your company wrote. I just enforced what already existed." "Why?" she asked again. "Why now?" I smiled slightly. "Because I finally stopped making excuses for you." She stared at me like I was a stranger, like she was trying to remember who I used to be. I didn't help her. She turned and walked back to her car, the defeat sinking in slower than the sun behind the hill. That night, East Point issued a vague internal memo about unexpected liquidity adjustments and trustee-triggered restructuring contingencies. The tone was pure damage control, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. They were hemorrhaging reputation now, and reputation, unlike money, doesn't have a 5-day recall window. It dies slow and loud. The board met Wednesday night in the same conference room where, a year earlier, they toasted the acquisition of a midtown tower with $800 champagne and vision speeches. Back then, they stood tall, kings of expansion, princes of luxury real estate, all flash and buzzwords. Now, the shades were drawn. The champagne was gone, and no one was talking about vision. They were talking about survival. The vote was called after finance confirmed what everyone already knew. East Point couldn't repay the $8.9 million within the window. Not without defaulting on 3 other loans and torching their development timelines. They tried everything: negotiation, stalling, even offering partial repayment in exchange for a delay. I declined. They even dangled backroom equity options. One partner actually had the gall to suggest I show good faith by reinvesting as an advisor. Poster call. I didn't reply. Graybridge Holdings replied for me. Clause 4E recall is non-negotiable once conduct breach is validated and trustee confirmation is filed. And there it was. No wiggle room. No press release fix. Just the black and white weight of their own signature ink dragging them under. So the board faced reality. They'd have to sell. Forced asset liquidation. Restructuring filings. Third-party review of every active project. The firm wouldn't disappear, not completely, but the East Point name would. Its projects would be picked apart, auctioned, absorbed into better-managed firms. Its reputation would become a case study in fiduciary negligence taught at second-tier MBA programs. The vote passed 6-1. One holdout, a junior partner who still believed in turning the ship. Poor bastard. And in the post-mortem, her name surfaced. Again and again. Spousal guest present without disclosure. Social media trail confirmed. Key trigger for contractual breach activation. She hadn't even worked there. Never filed a W-2. Never held a badge. Just showed up to a beach retreat, tagged executives on Instagram, and triggered the kind of clause that gets whispered about in legal forums for years. One line in the minutes stood out. Recommend full disassociation with all persons involved in conduct trigger, including non-employee spouse of former trustee. That was her new title. Not Susan. Not strategist. Not consultant. Non-employee spouse of former trustee. And they moved fast. By Friday morning, her name was scrubbed from the internal directory. Email privileges revoked. Access to events cut. The quarterly gala she helped coordinate? Her RSVP was canceled with a generic message. Thank you for your interest. Your attendance has been declined due to internal policy. The same people who used to send her birthday flowers and praise her presence were now pretending she never existed. She called me that afternoon. Voice thin. Croaky. They fired me, she said. You didn't work there? I replied. They removed me from everything. I know. Pause. It wasn't supposed to get this far, she whispered. I said nothing. Can't you fix it? You don't fix a bomb, Susan. You either defuse it before it blows, or you stand too close when it does. Another pause. I didn't know, she said. But you chose not to know. I corrected. That's worse. That was the last time she called. After that, her silence became more honest than her words ever were. I later found out she tried to meet with the firm's new legal liaison, probably to plead for reinstatement or some sanitized version of events. She never made it past reception. The new policy was clear. No former associates or guests involved in the Maple Note incident are to be granted access or affiliation under any circumstances. It wasn't personal. It was procedural. And now she was part of the fallout. Not a footnote. Not a victim. Just wreckage. The same as the firm. The same as the name. It started with a headline. Not on CNN, not on Bloomberg. Just a niche industry blog followed by real estate lawyers, private lenders, and board associates killing time between compliance trainings. But that was all it needed. Private firm collapses after spouse's ethics breach triggers $9 million recall. It spread faster than quarterly reports in bonus season. Syndicated to newsletters. Picked up by deal forums. Emailed in whispers with subject lines like, "Holy hell, is this about East Point?" Within 6 hours, it was everywhere. The article wasn't long, but it was merciless. It named the firm, the deal, the clause, the trustees. And then, it named her. Not explicitly, but the breadcrumb trail was obvious. The clause was activated after an executive spouse attended a company-funded retreat in violation of internal policy, and subsequently shared photos publicly tagging senior leadership in what appears to be a non-disclosed offsite. And there they were. 3 photos. One of her holding a glass of wine, arm around Derek. Another of her dancing barefoot in the sand with 2 board members. And the last? That damned flamingo floaty. She was laughing, legs in the pool, drink in hand, while a partner floated next to her. His face blurred, but her tag wasn't. At Susan_way more fun. That was her handle. They didn't blur that. The captions were quoted directly. No better way to unwind than dancing with legends. Life's too short for regrets. When strategy sessions end in sangria, I watched the comment section go from curious to nuclear in a matter of minutes. Some tried to defend her. She's not an employee. This is ridiculous. Honestly, sounds like bad contract law. So a wife had fun and the company collapsed? Come on. Then the counter comments hit. She tagged C-suite execs in a beach party funded by investor money. Check the clause. It's airtight. I've used the same framework myself. Clause 4E is standard for fiduciary conduct. East Point walked into this drunk. And the kill shot? Someone linked the original trust filing, public, buried in the Delaware Secretary of State database. Highlighted the trustee names. One of them was mine. I hadn't used that name in public in years. But there it was. The same one on our mortgage. The same one on our wedding license. The same one she used to mock at parties for being too serious. The article went viral in legal circles. Then finance. Then real estate. It wasn't front-page news, but it was industry-ending news. East Point's clients began pulling out of deals. Private equity partners ghosted their emails. And in the background, quietly but unmistakably, competitors began circling. Firms with cleaner books, tighter contracts, and no barefoot dancing liabilities. 2 days after the article dropped, East Point filed the first round of documents for structured dissolution. Not restructuring. Dissolution. They weren't even going to fight. Her former boss resigned by internal memo. No speech. No severance. Just a note. Effective immediately, I am stepping away from leadership responsibilities. I forwarded it to her. She didn't reply. Instead, she posted a panicked Instagram story, a black background with white text. It was just a vacation. I'm being dragged for something I didn't even understand. Be kind. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered the way she'd rolled her eyes the night I first mentioned fiduciary breaches. How she waved me off when I said some ethics violations weren't about right or wrong. They were about optics. About clauses that were never meant to be tested. She tested one. And now the clause had tested back. Her followers didn't buy her story. Comments were turned off within the hour. A week later, I saw a tweet from one of East Point's junior analysts. 2 years of work erased because someone needed to feel important on a beach. I saved that one. Pinned it, even. Not out of pettiness. Out of precision. Because for all the strategy, all the mechanics, all the filings and recalls and minutes and memos, in the end, it really was that simple. She wanted to feel important. And the company paid for it, with its name, its deals, and its future. She didn't just burn the bridge. She Instagrammed it in real time. She didn't knock. Just walked in like it was still her home. Like her key still meant something. I didn't look up right away. I was at the table, reading the paper. Real paper. Not a tablet. She hated that about me, called it boomer behavior. I used to joke that at least paper didn't run out of battery or spy on you. She'd roll her eyes. I'd smile. Those routines don't age well when the house is empty. She sat across from me without asking. No makeup. Hair unbrushed. She was wearing the same shirt I once brought back from a conference in Chicago. It was meant to be a joke. Oversized, ugly, said compliance is sexy across the chest. She used to laugh at it. Now she looked like it was weighing her down. Did you really do all this? She asked. Voice flat. Throat raw. I sipped my coffee. Black. No sugar. The way she used to complain it made me unapproachable. No, I said calmly. You just ignored the terms. Her lips parted. She looked like she had 10 arguments queued up. None made it past her teeth. Terms, she repeated finally. I folded the newspaper and placed it gently on the table. The ones you never read. The ones you thought only mattered if someone was angry enough to enforce them. I didn't know, she muttered, voice shaking. No one reads those clauses. That's the point of clauses, I replied. They exist so people can pretend they don't matter. Until they do. She glanced away, toward the window, out into the driveway. The car was still there. Her old boss, sitting like a statue, jaw clenched, pale as drywall, staring at something on his phone. He hadn't moved since pulling up, probably reading the foreclosure notice, or the board's asset surrender memo, or the termination clause they'd just served him, for cause. They said everything's gone, she whispered. The projects, the partnerships, the office. They're going to sell the building. They'll get pennies on the dollar, I said. That's what happens when panic sets the price. She turned back to me, finally angry, finally desperate. You waited for this. You planned this. No, I said again, softer this time. But I remembered. That's all it took. Because I hurt you? She asked. I tilted my head. No, I said. Because you never stopped laughing about it. She stared. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, coffee cooling beside me. There's one thing I never told you, I said. I only insisted on that clause, recall under conduct breach, because I heard your boss at that fundraiser 3 years ago, the one with the stupid little wine auction. He was drunk, gloating. Called me a low-rent compliance guy from the Rust Belt. Said I was only useful for paper shuffling and keeping his mistress off the books. She blinked. You laughed, I added. Didn't even wait till he left the circle. Just nodded and laughed. I don't. I remember. I interrupted. That's enough. She looked like someone had unplugged her mid-sentence. Her jaw moved, but nothing came out. There was no spin left. No smile. No Instagram filter to hide behind. I didn't mean. But you meant it when you danced with him, when you tagged him, when you called him a legend while he bled your firm dry. She slumped back in the chair. Her breath hitched. I thought I had time, she whispered. You did, I said. But you spent it. I stood up. No drama. No raised voice. Took the last sip of my coffee. Outside, her boss still hadn't moved. He was holding his phone in both hands now, as if it might explain something if he stared hard enough. His car windows were fogged from the inside. I walked to the door, paused, then turned back once. There's no redemption arc here, Susan, I said. Just math. Just terms. You weren't the villain, but you weren't the victim either. She didn't respond. She didn't follow me out, and I didn't look back.